And switch to the 3D view to see how that looks. So we have two views, the 2D view and the 3D view. And let's see how I locate my area. So I have this tool here that I can use to locate addresses. In this case, I'm already testing it so I know where I am. So I can skip that step. Second step would be to create new features. So that must be under the Edit tab, Create, but it's empty. Okay, we have this problem to solve. We need to go to the view, open the TOC or contents pane, and make sure the layer is editable. Okay, now it's here. So I can create a few buildings. I'm gonna go, please don't criticize my editing now. And, sorry, I'm using the wrong construction tool. I actually wanted to use the one that use the orthogonal angle, so we created two building footprints. Now I'd like to attribute both of them, so that's going to be under Edit Attributes, but I have to select the other one too. So let's use the Select tool. Wait, not selectable. Okay, go to the Selection tab. Now they should be selectable. Now I can do the attribution, and then I can switch to the 3D view. So now that I know how to do the workflow, let's try to put that into task and prevent the mistakes of layers not being visible, not being editable, not being selectable, and trying to automate that as well. So I'm going to close the tabs here. And the way you get to task is through the View tab, Task, and you have an empty pane. It tells you how to recover. You can just go and say New Task File, and you get Task Designer next to the task view. You can give the task file a name. A task file can contain multiple groups of tasks, multiple tasks. I'm going to call it Update Building. Once I do that, you can see it's been updated here on the top. You can put your author name, you can put a description for someone that gets it to know what tasks that would contain, and you can manage the version of that. You can create multiple groups. Maybe one will be to create new buildings, and the other one could be to modify existing ones. So you can group tasks to make in some logical order by the task that it contains, or you can just have them on the root level as well if you wanted to. I pressed the New Task button. Now I have a new task. It's empty, has no steps inside, and I could call it Create Buildings Footprints. Another thing that you can do here in the description is tell the user what this is all about, and as you update it, they'll see it on the bottom. You can attach hyperlinks to any instruction. That hyperlink can open a document, a web page. It can open a video file on YouTube, whatever you want. Link to your business logic that might help the user do their task or the step, as well as the ArcGIS Pro help itself. So I might have a step that says create features, but if I want to learn more about that process, I can go and learn more through the help documentation that's available online. So once I've done that, I can just double click to start create steps inside. So let's start with our first step that we wanted, which was to locate work area. Another thing about task is that you use your own business language, in whatever language you use, of course. But for example, it's not generic tool, it's now locate work area, something that applies to your business, and you can use address and you can specify more instruction on how to do anything. The command we want to call now is called the locate command. So right now you can call any command in the ArcGIS Pro or any geoprocessing tool. So the first step will actually call the locate command. So I can search for that and use the locate command that we just saw. When we get to the step, we might want to automatically proceed after the user decides to locate something to the next step. And because they might already be in the right area, we might want to switch the optional term here, so they would see this, they would get the skip button. So everything is interactive. As you switch things on and off, you see them happening on the task pane as well. The other thing you might want to do is make sure they're using the right map. So you can choose, you want them always to use the 2D map when they do this action. That will make the 2D map to become active and prevent it from working with the wrong map view for this specific task. And there's also layer control that we'll see here in a second. There's another way of doing the same thing. Instead of creating a step-by-step and looking for the commands, I can just do the workflow and record what I'm doing. Let's see how so the red button here is the record commands. Once I hit that, you can see it kind of vibrating. It has a heartbeat. I'm being recorded right now. So that's a way for me to just work through my workflow and have the steps being created automatically. So we wanted to do the editing and create new features. So I can create a few more features here. So I'm going to create buildings where they don't exist. We'll undo those edits later. So we created 2 buildings. You can also interact and delete any step while that is happening. So you don't have to, if you have steps that you make by mistake because you suddenly use the navigate tool or you want to add another step manually, you can just add it. So while recording, you're not prevented from doing and interacting with the task design. So after we create the features, I want the user, instead of using the select tool to select manually those polygons, I want to select automatically for the user. So I'm going to use a geoprocessing tool called select by attributes. So again, very simple workflow. And if we go now to the command tab, you'll see some commands will be embedded within, have the option to be embedded within the task pane. That means that the user doesn't have to go to other panes to complete the work. They are still contained within the task. So this one will be embedded, and I wanted to always select from this layer, create a new selection, and do a specific SQL course, which is to make sure everything that was created today is bigger than the current date. That will just select everything that we just created today. So not only you can call geoprocessing tools, you can set some of the parameters to be preset for the user. So maybe you have a GP tool. If you can guess all the parameters for a geoprocessing tool, you can also make this rule run automatically for the user without them interacting. If there's a few parameters they need to interact, you can leave those blank, and that's something for the user to complete on their own. This name doesn't make too much sense. We'll just call it select new buildings instead. So again, we don't select things or create features, we create building footprints. Okay, so everything is in context. I can edit everything as I go about it. Now we're gonna create some attributes, and you can provide instructions here which attributes are mandatory, which need to be entered and how. And now I'm going to create a new step, and this step is not going to call any command. I can stop recording now. The only thing this step is going to do is switch the view to the 3D map for review. Okay, so like we saw in the plenary session, the 3D view was used to actually examine the attributes that were used to drive the symbology. So a few more things we might want to do before we send this task to someone. Let's work through our different behaviors. So the locate work area is going to auto proceed. That means that the user has to run it, but they also have the option to skip it. We can see the 2 buttons available here on the left. Create features will be embedded inside the task. We don't need to go and open the create features pane. Goodbye. Select new buildings. We want that to be run automatically. So we are going to choose to run it automatic. We have the option also to make it hidden, so the user doesn't see it. Since I don't like to surprise users, I'm going to just keep it automatic, but inform them that this thing is happening behind the scenes. The attributes pane is embedded within the task, and because it's embedded, we already know the behavior it needs to obtain. And the switch to 3D view, what we need to do here is to make sure that 3D view becomes the active one. So we'll switch automatically to the 3D view. So I think we're kind of ready to see how that all plays together. And one more thing we want to do. When we create new buildings, it would be a good idea to make sure they are visible and editable. So we can go to the contents view and the Sonoma buildings there. Let's make it sure that it's a three-way toggle. You can make sure it's going to be closed. You can make sure it's going to be selectable, and you can keep it as is. So we want to make sure that it is visible and editable. In the selection phase, we want to make sure it is selectable. You can right click and make sure everything else is non-selectable, for example, right? So in this instance, there's not too many layers, but if you have a map that has 20 layers, maybe in this specific step you want to make only a specific layer selectable. So you don't make mistakes and select layers you didn't intend to select and make other mistakes. After beta 4, you also see that you can control snapping and the label, turning on and off labels. So that's coming soon. So now that we have designed our task, just so you know, it's a good idea before we send it by email to someone to test that it's working. So let's undo our edits. I'm going to use the select tool here to select all the crazy buildings. And now let's do some random workflow as a user, make sure that it works. So locate work area. Another thing you can do, maximize your working space. See the map. You have all the tools in the right place. No need to show the ribbon. If you find that you still need the ribbon for a certain operation like measure, user can always go and open that place they need to open. Tasks do not prevent you from working outside of the task. They guide you. You can still go outside of the task and do other operations if you need to do those. So locate work area. Again, I'm going to skip that. You can see the indication that step has been skipped. Create buildings. Everything I need is right here. You also have the option for this specific tool to filter the editing templates you see. So if you have a large number of editing templates, maybe instead of setting the editability only to that layer, you have another way of just specifying the name of the editing template you want to use. I'm going to create 2 buildings, at least 2, so you see the right buildings being created. And I'm going to press the next step. You can see the GP has ran and selected the 2 buildings for me. The attributes here are being presented, and what we are going to do now is select both of them. It would be probably good to only sorry, it was already selected. Good idea to minimize the number of fields here. I'm going to set those to 3 floors so we can see it in 3D. And when we go next step, without touching the mouse, we should have set it to auto run. It switches automatically to the 3D map. Because those 2 views are linked, here's those 2 buildings we just created. In the future, we are considering also being able to organize the map layouts for you. So maybe the author wants to always have them side by side as a preset template for map view. Now that we worked through the task, the last thing would be to finish the task, and we are back into the same to the task pane, viewing all the tasks that are available, and can then just go to the send to by email and send it to someone else. In any stage, if you find, usually you might go through the design phases a few times, so if you find you have any mistake, go to designer, double click the level and the thing you want to modify, and you can easily access and modify what needs to be modified. Whether it's the step behavior, or any text that you put in there. For those that make spelling mistakes like me, yes, we also indicate that when you put in the description, so you can fix that. Go over quickly because we have a few minutes over the step behaviors. Manual is a step that the user presses the run button to call the command, and has also, after they run it, the opportunity to decide when they want to leave that step and move to the next step. If you have maybe a geoprocessing tool that you want to run more than one times, make it manual. You can run it multiple times in that environment, and the user is in control when to move to the next step. Autorun will always invoke and run the command of the GP tool, but the user will decide when they want to proceed. A good example here, maybe you want to pop up the selection tool and auto-run it, and the user tells you when they've done their selection. So many times you select the wrong things and then you have to reselect and so on. So a select would be a good example for an auto-run. You get the select cursor, you tell the user what to select, and they tell you when they've done selecting and move to the next step. Auto-proceed is something that the user has to run, but once they ran it, they can move on to the next thing automatically, like maybe the locate that we did there. And automatic is something, if it's a GP, it's something you know all the parameters and you can just run it for the user, or something you want to do behind the scenes. You can hide steps. You can hide steps that only maybe set the layer visibility. So if you always want a certain task to start with a specific set of layers, visible and selectable and so on, you can have that either as a hidden step, or you can have it as part of another step and set it such that it just does it for the user. And an optional step is something that the user can skip. So that would enable the skip button to be there. Now that we are happy with our task, we can either save it into a file. So it prompted me that the design here is not saved, I need to save it, and I can choose where I want to save it, or I can send it by email, and that will use your default email browser. So there's two scenarios. Jason here asked me for a task file, and I just sent it to him by email, and he can use it, or I can send it as an author to a wide variety of users. In the future, we want your best practices in every industry reflected in tasks. So you can share this knowledge, put it online, and grow a community that knows how to do things under the best practices you might have, and the business logic you might have. In the future, if you have a task that points to layers and maps you don't have in your project, the user will be able to correct those broken tasks that reference resources you don't have. So I call those my Sonoma buildings, but maybe you call it under another name, and turn on off those layers. So you'll be able to map that task to your own building layers to have that, control that layer. Where we are with tasks before we move to the questions.